Most of Canada's finance ministers have received low grades from Canada's taxpayer watchdog.
Alberta has lifted their ban on American-made liquor, but a hefty surtax on the products remains.
Despite Prime Minister Mark Carney's indication of interest, a sizable majority of Canadians reject joining President Donald Trump's Golden Dome program. Hello Canada, it's Wednesday, June 11th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Noah Jarvis.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. The majority of Canada's finance ministers earned failing or barely passing grades on the Canadian Taxpayer Federation's annual performance report card, as raising debt levels leave taxpayers footing the bill. While spending increased in every province compared to last year's budget, the CTF graded the performance of finance ministers on several criteria, including debt levels, interest payments, spending increases, and tax relief. Even the nation's top performer didn't receive an A. The CTF gave Saskatchewan Finance Minister Jim Ryder a B+. Gage Haubrick, CTF's Prairie Director, said, quote, "It's great to see Saskatchewan trim taxes, but it also needs to stop racking up debt and wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on debt interest payments." Ryder received his lowest mark in the debt category, earning a C after the provincial government increased its debt by $2.4 billion this year compared to last. Alberta Finance Minister Nate Horner followed with an overall score of B. Horner scored an A+ in tax relief after cutting the lowest income tax rate from 10 to 8%, saving a typical Albertan two-person family about $1,500 annually. However, Horner saw the other extreme in the spending increase category, earning an F. Alberta's spending increased by 8.4% this year, the second highest growth nationwide. The streak of B grades ended with Nova Scotia Finance Minister John Lohr, who earned a C+, coming in third place. Lohr earned an A in tax relief after implementing a 1% HST cut and a small business tax rate cut. However, Lohr earned a D in the debt category after increasing the provincial debt by $2.2 billion this year. It will reach $22.4 billion by year's end, totaling $20,776 per person, the sixth highest nationwide. Despite earning Fs in numerous categories, Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy narrowly avoided a failing grade overall with his D-. Bethlenfalvy got an F in debt after increasing the debt by nearly $22 billion year over year. Per person debt will reach $28,472 by year's end, the second highest nationwide. He also earned an F in spending increases after increasing spending by 7.9% compared to last year, the third highest in the country. British Columbia Finance Minister Brenda Bailey also narrowly avoided a failing grade with her D-. Bailey got an F in debt after increasing the provincial debt by $23.6 billion this year. By the end of the year, British Columbians will owe over $27,000 each, the fourth highest per capita debt nationwide. The last finance minister to earn a D- overall grade was Quebec Finance Minister Éric Girard. He received Fs in both the debt and debt interest payment categories. Quebec will increase its provincial debt by $13.6 billion this year. The province's budget was so poor that it received its first credit downgrade since the 1990s after tabling it. I think Canadians looking at the results of this report card will be disappointed but not surprised. At the provincial level and especially at the federal level, I feel like Canadians have become accustomed to finance ministers who overspend, who rack up debt, and have no real plan to balance budgets and cut deficits. And while this has happened for a while, I think the trend towards just massive spending programs was really accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic. And once governments got an appetite for spending massive amounts of taxpayer money and dishing it out, a little bit of it out to taxpayers as a sort of vote buying scheme. They couldn't put that down and continue to do it to this day in many forms. But Noah, beyond that, why are Canada's finance ministers performing so badly and are unable to be fiscally responsible?
I think Canadian governments, whether they're the federal government, provincial government, they suffer from a problem of not being able to plan ahead for the future. We saw provincial governments and the federal government especially rack up government debt by, tabling budgets that had excessive spending plans, so that when the COVID-19 pandemic arrived, governments had to go so far into deficit spending that the federal government was spending hundreds of billions of dollars in just deficit spending, and it really caused an inflation crisis that many Canadians are still feeling the effects of today. And you saw a similar story after the COVID-19 pandemic, when budgets sort of normalized back to normal levels, although those normal levels were actually quite a bit higher than what they were before the pandemic. But instead of normalizing the provinces or the country's finances, trying to run budgets with surpluses. Instead, these finance ministers decided to bring in new spending programs, new government programs, expand the public sector to such a degree that when President Trump's tariffs are slapped onto Canadian goods, and Canada is projected to go into recession, many of these finance ministers have to report these large deficits because they are projecting a decrease in government revenues for good reason. It's because they have not been able to manage their provinces or the country's finances in a way that would be responsible. I think the fact that Alberta's finance minister has received a B grade shows the commitment of that province and their finance minister and Premier Smith to at least try to rein in the province's finances. I know Premier Smith a while back announced that the province would be setting up a fund for a fund that would be replenished every year, especially with government surpluses, and that fund would basically act as a rainy day fund. You don't really have any other provinces establishing such a fund. And in due course, you're having, say, the Quebec Finance Minister Eric Girard receiving a D minus. In my province of Ontario, you have Finance Minister Bethlen Falvey, who tabled a budget with a $14.7 billion deficit. This is not a federal government tabling a budget with a $14.7 billion deficit. This is a province. Even though it is the largest province, it is still quite absurd that Ontario's debt is reaching close to $500 billion, as is projected to reach in 2 years. So if these finance ministers want to receive better grades from Canada's premier financial taxpayer watchdog, I think they need to take a whole new approach to crafting their budgets, try to cut government spending, try and cut the size of the civil service so that you can actually return the government books back to the green. Albertans can once again purchase American-made liquor after the province ended a 3-month ban on U.S. alcohol imports. However, new products will still be subject to a steep surtax. The Alberta Gaming, Liquor, and Cannabis Commission announced Friday it is once again allowing U.S. liquor products to enter the province following a directive from the provincial government. The move comes after Premier Daniel Smith's government halted U.S. liquor imports in March as part of Alberta's response to tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on Canadian goods. Under the new policy, liquor agencies can once again book shipments of U.S. alcohol through the AGLC system. However, a 25% surtax remains in place for American liquor products shipped after March 4th. U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra welcomed the province's decision on Friday. He said, quote, "Very glad to see that Albertans can once again enjoy a cold U.S. beer or a glass of wine. Thanks to Premier Daniel Smith for your leadership in removing this barrier to fair and reciprocal trade." Smith first announced the liquor ban on March 6th, saying it was part of a broader strategy to support Canadian producers in the face of U.S. trade actions. She said a collective move by premiers to remove U.S. products would result in an estimated $3 billion revenue loss for American suppliers, motivating them to lobby Congress for an end to the tariffs. The lifting of Alberta's liquor ban comes amid ongoing trade tensions between Canada and the United States. While U.S. alcohol products are once again available for import, the province's broader position on the trade measures, including restrictions on new pipeline deals with the U.S., remains in place. So, Cosmin, we saw Canada's premiers from across the country remove American liquor from Canadian liquor store shelves because they felt that the tariffs were an attack against Canadian industry and the Canadian economy, and they wanted to collectively do some sort of performative act that would show that they are standing side by side in combating these tariffs by, at the very least, removing American-made liquor from store shelves. However, Premier Smith is breaking from the pack. Once again, she is now saying that American liquor should be restocked. So, what message is Premier Smith trying to send by restocking Albertan shelves with American-made liquor?
Well, it's a show of good faith, right? While also maintaining some leverage because the 25% surtax remains. But Smith, by doing that, signals that Alberta is not going to abandon its concerns about the unfair trade tariffs that were imposed on Canada and Alberta, but is they're also willing to be a constructive partner and to get rid of these, US liquor bans is a sort of olive branch extending towards the US, indicating that it's time to work together to be more open and negotiate a way out of this entire mess. And I'd like to point back that it was really Danielle Smith who warned from the start that a tit for tat trade war with the US would ultimately harm Canadians more than the United States. And it's proven to be true. I think it was obvious to everybody who was looking at this from a clear perspective at that time when the Liberal government was talking about a dollar for dollar retaliation. Even Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who might want us or Canadians at large to forget this, was also advocating dollar for dollar retaliation against the US. It just really underscores how consistent Smith has been on this and to prioritize diplomacy and trade policy over these headline grabbing, overtures about retaliation that on paper don't make sense, but might sound good, especially during an election period, as we saw it during the federal election. And the liquor ban itself, it was always meant to be a temporary measure, an indication that Alberta was willing to fight back and harm an industry that is quite lucrative in Canada. The US alcohol industry does make money off Canadian consumers, but it wasn't supposed to be permanent. And I suspect, as the trade war develops and the continuing negotiation between the Canadian government and US trade representatives, hopefully it will result in some trade deal and provinces will follow suit. But again, Smith seems to have bucked this trend towards retaliation and been an early adopter of the right way forward, which is collaboration, negotiation, and finding common ground. A majority of Canadians do not want to join U.S. President Donald Trump's Golden Dome continental missile defense system, despite early indications of a desire by Prime Minister Mark Carney to have Canada included in the program. In a poll conducted by Nanos Research, Canadians were asked if Canada should, quote, pay the price to be included in the Golden Dome missile shield, or if the government should instead focus spending on boosting the Canadian Armed Forces capability. The polling question disclosed that the program would cost taxpayers an estimated $61 billion US dollars, or approximately $83.5 billion when converted to Canadian currency. The poll found that 63% of Canadians say that we should not be part of funding the Golden Dome system, should instead boost funding for the CAF, while only 17% say Canada should pay the price and be part of it. Opposition to the Golden Dome cuts across several demographic groups as a majority of Canadians from every province and of all ages oppose contributing funding to the program, though men are twice as likely to support the program than women. The Golden Dome, named after Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, is the Trump administration's latest project to create a missile defense system to intercept foreign missile attacks on the United States. Trump has promised that the Golden Dome would cost $175 billion to develop and will be built by the end of his presidential term, 3.5 years. While the president said that Canada would have to pay $61 billion to be included in the system, the Golden Dome would cost nothing if Canada decided to become the 51st state. Trump claimed that Carney is, quote, considering the offer. Prime Minister Mark Carney has confirmed that his government is engaged in ongoing discussion about Canada's inclusion in the Golden Dome project, though nothing has been finalized yet. What this survey really fails to ask is whether Canada really has a choice, given the trend of global escalation of conflicts, etc. Being left defenseless doesn't seem like a good idea. And additionally, there is a sort of false equivalency here that the Canadian Armed Forces just boosting spending on the CAF's capabilities could somehow be equivalent to having a continental wide missile defense system. And if you know anything about the state of the CAF, the state of Canada's defenses and military capabilities, we simply do not have the capacity to have a continental level missile defense system. We couldn't build it ourselves. First of all, we don't have the technological know-how or manpower to pull it off. And secondly, the CAF is hardly capable of meeting current mission capabilities, let alone something as wide-reaching and wide in scope as a continental missile shield. So given that, Noah, does this project represent the next inevitable step in providing a defense for North America, given worst case scenarios like an attack directly on US or Canadian territory, God forbid?
I think so, especially if this is the direction that the United States president wants to take. I mean, just look at how effective Israel's Iron Dome's missile defense system is at protecting their own country. You can look at the videos online, and they're quite astonishing with just how effective the Iron Dome system is. And I'm pretty sure President Trump sees those same clips and wants the same thing for North America. And quite frankly, since the end of the Cold War, Canada, the United States, Europe, the entire Western world has taken defense for granted. They've taken the fact that the world is generally a secure place where war is, becoming less and less frequent. But this is something that you can't really take for granted anymore, as you have a war between Israel and Hamas, with Hamas terrorists attacking a Western liberal democracy, as has been the case throughout Israel's entire history. But nonetheless, it is still an important conflict that many people around the world are paying attention to, and is also the case with the Russia-Ukraine war, where people are feeling increasingly unsafe with the prospect of a Russia that is emboldened by its territorial conquest of eastern Ukraine. So I think that creating a continental missile defense system is the next step in protecting the United States, Canada, North America more generally. And it looks like this missile defense system could be the next step in advancing Canada and the United States relationship through NORAD. Right now, Canada and the United States, they are in a joint organization to provide for continental defense. It's called NORAD, and under NORAD's auspices, they have something called the North Warning System, which is a radar detection system that would detect whether or not Canada, the United States, is under siege generally from the threat of Russian nuclear attacks. But this would also apply to China. But the North Warning System is becoming outdated. It needs to be replaced by the United States and Canada collectively. And perhaps instead of replacing it with a new North Warning System, you're instead going to have the Golden Dome, which not just acts as a warning system, but actually functions as a missile defense system. With that said, it is quite the expensive project. Trump estimated that it would cost $175 billion and that Canada would have to pay $61 billion. Sure, that would help Canada in getting closer to our commitment to getting to spending 2% of GDP on defense. However, as you mentioned, Cosmin, Canada's armed forces really has some very basic problems. We don't have enough military men in the forces. We don't have enough equipment, whether that be small arms, large arms, ammunition. We don't have the next generation of fighter jets yet, the F-35s. So Canada is still working on that purchase. However, the Carney government has indicated that they're reviewing the contract and might actually cancel it. There are some very fundamental needs that Canada's military has, and instead of perhaps meeting them with this Golden Dome project, you could focus on the basics of getting an icebreaker to help police the Arctic, of getting the vehicles and the equipment that our military men need. So it will be incumbent on Mark Carney to pick the right decision, to choose the right path, whether or not to collaborate with the American president in creating this Golden Dome project, or if he feels as if this is a project that has a potential to overrun in its costs, and instead the money would be better spent in providing for those more fundamental needs that the Canadian Armed Forces has. But nonetheless, I would feel more safe if the entirety of North America was protected by the Golden Dome.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.